Good evening, everyone. And I would like to call this meeting, seeing that we have quorum in the room of the board for September the 24th, 2024 to order. And this evening we are meeting in the unceded and unsurrendered ancestral homelands of the Algonquin Nation. In the spirit of truth and reconciliation, we acknowledge their enduring presence and stewardship of these lands since time immemorial. And we thank the Algonquin people for sharing the grandfather teachings and other ancient wisdom with us and with our students and staff, for we still have much to learn. Moving on to item 3 on our agenda, are there any declarations of interest from trustees in accordance with the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? And seeing none, I would like to move then to the report from Committee of the Whole in camera. Vice Chair Milburn.
The board met as Committee of the Whole in camera this evening and there were no recommendations.
Thank you very much. Moving on then to approval of the agenda. Could we have a mover for the agenda? Trustee Nash, seconded by Trustee Dixon. Are there any changes to the agenda? And I'm not seeing any hands raised, so I will call the question on the agenda as presented. All those in favor and opposed, and that motion is carried. Next item on our agenda is item 6. And this evening, I am very pleased to welcome Emily Addison and Carolyn Webb, co-chairs of the Alternative Schools Advisory Committee, to make a presentation on the committee's work during the past year. And I see we have the support of Superintendent Hannah here as well. So I believe you have about 10 minutes for your presentation, and there will be an opportunity for trustees to ask questions following. Thank you so much for being here.
Can you hear me now? Great. Okay. Thank you. My name is Emily Addison, and this is Carolyn Webb, and we are the co-chairs of the Alternative Schools Advisory Committee. And this is our presentation on our work from last school year. We had originally been scheduled to present to you in May, but board services needed to make some adjustments. So what you'll be seeing today is covering the work of the 23-24 school year. We're not specifically focusing on the program review, although we know that's on your minds a lot. You will see though, however, we did a fair bit of work on the program review, and in that way we will be touching upon it. We do hope to come back to you sometime in the fall to further advise the board about our program relating to the review. Next slide, please. So just to recap, we last came to you about a year and a half ago, and a number of the board members were new. So we started our presentation by providing a brief overview about what the alternative elementary program is all about. And that included covering our tenets. There are 7 tenets that kind of address our program, and they are cooperation and teamwork, innovative approaches, balance of student-directed and teacher-led learning, purposeful multi-age groupings, integrated curriculum, family and community-centered school environment, and assessment and evaluation focused on personal growth and student goal setting. So in addition to talking about our tenets, we summarized the findings of our 2021 community conversation, which had input from families, students, and staff about the value of our program and current impediments that we saw, or they saw. We highlighted our work of that school year for you, and we listed 3 opportunities. And at that meeting, a couple of you asked us to come back with recommendations to the board. So we do have some recommendations this evening as part of our report. Next slide, please. So this is the work that we've been doing, or we did this past year. We confirmed the new principal profile for alternative principals was in place for all K-6 schools, and that was developed with all 4 alternative elementary schools, K-6. We met with Superintendent Dua about the 7-8 alternative program. We began work with Superintendent Hannah about setting up a shared drive to support collaboration across the alternative schools. We began a process of clarifying and deepening the language of the tenants because we see opportunities to make them clearer and deeper, stronger language. We made the decision not to pursue a change of program name, which was a question that Trustee Lyra had raised when we last appeared, and we followed up and shared the reasoning for that with Trustee Lyra, and we can talk about that if you like. And then we received a presentation from Superintendent Simmons, thank you, about special education supports and resources in alternative schools. We are still asking to receive numbers about the profile of students in our program who have special needs. So we'll continue working on that. And then we began planning some school learning opportunities. Next slide, please. You can imagine when the program review came out, though, this was of great interest to our committee. And so we pivoted, excuse me for using that word, to focus our work for the rest of the year on the program review. And about a week or two after the review was announced, Director Buffoni came and spoke to the ASAC about the review and what was entailed, and we were able to ask some questions. But we wanted to be able to provide feedback as a committee. So what we did was we took a collaborative approach, which is what we often do on ASAC, and we invited anyone on our ASAC email list to provide input. And that included, for instance, all school councils, all the principals, some senior admin, lots of families and communities could all provide input into our report. And we had a team of families and community members do research, writing, and reviewing of that report. And then that 42-page report was submitted to senior staff on June 27th of last year. And it was shared also, of course, with the program review team. The purpose of this report was to address the 10 questions in Report 2452, which, as you know, is the report that came out in early April framing the program review, and there was 10 questions there. So we went through explicitly answering all 10 of those. We also provided other information that we thought would be helpful for decision makers, and we provided some interim recommendations based upon what we knew about the program review at that time. Next slide, please. So here are a few highlights about how we answered those 10 questions. We illustrated very clearly how the tenants provide a solid base in teaching and learning, but not only how they do that, but how the schools actually are successful at implementing best practices. In equity, and you'll see we have a section, you'll be provided that the report later this evening through board services. We really focused on equity rather than equality because in terms of a social justice lens, what our understanding and the common understanding in terms of elevating the marginalized is really we need to focus on equitable access. So we showed how the alternative program is grounded in equity, how program options are key to an equitable approach to education, and how geographical marginalization creates inequity. We also talked about how the academic needs of students are being met and how the program does a really great job at things like learning styles and special needs and social emotional learning and well-being and engaging families. And we also addressed the question about how the program fits into a sustainable use of resources. Next slide, please. Our main message in our submission is that we believe that the elementary alternative program is exceptionally well positioned to equitably advance student achievement and well-being as well as to achieve many other strategic objectives that the board currently has. Next slide, please. Our report also addressed a number of other areas, just a few highlights. We demonstrated how the program is truly a different approach to elementary education. And I encourage you to look at section 3.1. We shared robust examples of how the tenants in action function in terms of a different approach, and we included a number of research references in Appendix 4. We also listed areas for improvement. That was one of the questions in Report 2452. We not only included, though, the list of improvement opportunities, but recommendations. And many of these recommendations actually require little to no additional staff resources. We provided specific ideas on approaches for expanding the program in a really thoughtful and meaningful and effective way. We listed prior recommendations to CAL regarding our program. ASAC has appeared in 1995 and 2010 with a number of recommendations. And then finally, we provided examples of publicly funded alternative programs. So right here in Ottawa, both the French Public and French Catholic Board have alternative schools. There are publicly funded Waldorf schools, Montessori schools, IB elementary schools, there are art schools, there are many alternative schools right here in Ottawa. And then of course, TDSB, as many of you know, has 19 elementary alternative schools. It's a very robust program. Next slide, please. So just to highlight our recommendations, our main recommendation is to maintain the current alternative schools and incrementally designate additional alternative schools as they show readiness over the next 5 years. In addition, we recommend developing an official policy. TDSB has had an official alternative schools policy for many years, and they recently updated it. We recommend implementing a strong communication plan, enhance collaboration across schools, strengthen wording of the tenants, continue to strengthen structures, strengthen the French language delivery in alternative and inclusive ways, and explore the possibility of these schools becoming learning lab schools. All of this is outlined in our report. We also provided a number of suggestions on how the elementary program as a whole could be improved. Next slide, please. Just to say those recommendations, we as ASAC are working closely with Amy and other key partners in senior staff to move some of these recommendations forward ourselves. And so we don't see this work as being burdened simply on the board, but ASAC is here to do the work. And this is some of the work that we will be continuing to do this year, including the tenants, community learning opportunities, connecting school communities, clarifying roles, and creating promotional material. So finally, I just wanted to finish with a question for the board. And hopefully you'll have some questions for us, but next slide, please. We were hoping to find out how ASAC could further advise the Board of Trustees through the rest of the program review. We already have read the consultation report from early in September, and we know that there are additional documents coming out over the next few weeks. And we would love to have an opportunity as an advisory committee with the program involved with this review to be able to come back and speak to you again specifically about the review. Thank you very much. We welcome any questions.
And thank you for your presentation. To answer your first question, there will be ample opportunities for ASAC and individual members of ASAC both to participate in the consultations that will be happening through the fall and perhaps even longer than just this fall. When we are moving into an approaching recommendations time, that would be an excellent time for ASAC to make some form of presentation to the board at that point in time. So there will be plenty of opportunities, but in the meantime, I hope that parents in the elementary alternative schools, like parents in all of our schools, will participate in all of the consultations.
Wonderful, thank you.
And in terms of questions for you, Trustee Lyra has had a question.
Thank you. It's good to see you again. I'm really glad to hear that you had a conversation about the name. I'm disappointed to hear you haven't decided you wish to change it because there is a great deal of confusion between the alternate program and the alternative program, but so be it. My questions for you are, which of the tenets do you feel is most applicable, or which of the tenets do you feel are most applicable to general programs that you would want to see in a lead up to a new alternative school? And my second question is, do you feel the 7 tenets are the ones that you think are most relevant in the modern era? Are there any you would wish to add, or are there any you think might have served their purpose?
Yeah, I can start. Thank you for the question. It gives a lot of room for thought. One of the features of the alternative program is that for your first question of are there specific ones that we would really choose, it's kind of a package. It's a set of like a broad philosophy that really, people have named them best practices often. I think it's really hard myself to think of them kind of working in isolation. And so I guess if there was more kind of nuance around, what the intention is of separating them out, but I can't think of how, of any ones that would be more important than the others. Like they kind of inform and feed on each other with the multi-age groupings, with the community involvement, with opportunities for collaborative learning and non-competition, and all of that. They kind of create a philosophy and an approach to learning. And then in terms of trying to think of the specifics of your second. Yeah.
In terms of additional tenants, we did do a first round of consultations with, we invited staff and families to provide input in terms of, do you think there's anything missing from the tenants? Do you think there is anything that shouldn't be in the tenants? What language do you find confusing or you don't understand? And so we did a lot of collecting of data last year. And the one item that people raised in terms of potentially being included was kind of the civic mindedness piece of social justice, environmental engagement. That was something that people thought would be appropriate and fit within the broader context of the tenants that we currently have. There were none that people felt should be removed. There were definitely opportunities to deepen the language. And when we went to the community, we purposely framed it. ASAC did not feel that we thought the tenants needed to change, but we were open to listening to the community about what the community wanted for the tenants. And we are working with Superintendent Hannah through the principals. We're going to be getting student input this fall, and we will continue to get staff input as well. That's on the docket for future staff meetings at the schools. So it's an ongoing iterative process, and we work by consensus. And so we are looking to, it's not going to be kind of like a vote thing of like, oh, some people agree with this change and other people don't. We're going to work on this until the community feels that the new deepened language fits for all.
Thanks. My second question.
We really usually would only ask one question, but if
Okay.
and I've got a number of other people who have questions. So if we can go on to Trustee Kaplan-Murth.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation and the wonderful stuff that goes on in alternative schools. No question about that. But what I'm wondering about, and I'm not sure if you can answer this, but we know that there's a disproportionate number of students with special needs and disabilities and behavioral issues who are effectively being streamed into alternative schools and out of French immersion. Do you, as a committee, have recommendations in terms of those needs I can't pull it up right now, but we did have reports in our previous meetings that looked at, I think, the student performance in alternative schools, and these are issues that we do see again and again. So, what are your recommendations in terms of the supports and resources that are required for alternative schools to truly be able to achieve the tenets of it being a safe and wonderful environment?
That's a really great question, and it's a difficult one because I would say that we do see students, and I think the report that was provided with the community feedback to you around September 27th or 30th reflect the fact that a lot of students are not succeeding in the French immersion program, and so they're being effectively, I'm going to use the word pushed out, but I don't know if that's a fair assessment, but they're ending up in the English program and the alternative program. The alternative program welcomes all students, and we love the fact that there are students who were not succeeding in the French immersion program who find a home at the alternative school and thrive. And you'll see in our 42-page report, there are some amazing testimonials of families where their lives were changed. They're profoundly changed when they came to our schools. There are also other families like ourselves who chose to send our children to alternative schools from kindergarten because we believed in the philosophy. So people come in different ways. What we do know, what I will say is we actually haven't seen publicly the data to show that the alternative schools have higher percentages. We have been told some information that would enlighten that it's likely, and that there are additional resources shared. But we would like to see that data a little bit more closely. And we do know that I can just imagine if I was a teacher and we had there's someone involved in our ASAC committee whose child was in a class of 21 students and 17 students have IEPs. Now, IEPs can come in many forms for many reasons, and there are different needs for IEPs. But if you can imagine 17 students out of 21 with IEPs, that's a lot of different needs to meet in a class. And if I was a teacher and I have my teaching degree, I would find that pretty overwhelming myself. And I think I would also find that difficult to accept if I knew that in other programs in the board, there were classes that, like, on average, there was way less needs. I think it's an equity piece that we see happening at these schools. And yes, there are resources being directed to schools that have higher needs, which is great. But there is also a point to which, like, there can be just too many needs in one class. But what I will say is that parents who have their children in alternative schools believe strongly in these schools and value these schools deeply, and that the schools are doing amazing work regardless. And so I think what we would like you to know is that we really are punching well above our weight in terms of value for money, because we are meeting all these needs and we are satisfying parents and kids where they weren't being satisfied elsewhere and they weren't succeeding elsewhere. And we would love to talk with you about that further once you read our report.
Thank you. I don't have all that much to add, except that one of the recommendations we had talked about is if, I know that there are like board-wide ratios of what the classroom to teacher ratios, and if schools that do have higher needs could have smaller student to teacher ratios or smaller classrooms. Yeah.
We weren't actually thinking about lower ratios because we know that that's dictated by the ministry. But you know how there's the allowed 10% above, you could have 10% classes above the cap. Does that make sense? And we were thinking, if there are these schools that are identified, whether they are French immersion or English core French or alternative program, that are clearly schools that attract students with more needs, try to avoid putting classes that are above that maximum cap in those schools, because you already know that there's a lot of things happening in those classes. So that was something that we were talking about, but that we hadn't come to any kind of consensus. It's a consideration.
Thank you for that. We still have questions from 4 more speakers, and we do have other business on our agenda. So I will go next to Trustee Presley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. It's lovely to see you both in person. I wanted to first thank you for your time and dedication, as this is a volunteer role, and you both do, and the entire committee does fantastic work. For my question, what would you feel currently is the biggest challenge for ASAC in achieving its mandate?
And for the committee specifically, or for the broader community?
If I can narrow down my question a little bit more, in terms of the awareness of the difference between alternative and alternate programs, what would you say the biggest challenge you face in ensuring the general public understands the differentials between them?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. It is something that comes up, I think, at every single ASAC meeting, that the communications, the broader communications, the families, that administrators, that educators at other schools, that folks throughout the board and all different, that very few really understand what the alternative program is. And so it comes up time and time again of, can a communications strategy be developed to communicate the program, and what it involves, what it isn't, the strengths, and where just that children, where a family might want to choose the program, and just raising awareness would be a really key strategy. We've heard a lot of stories of families saying, "I wish I had have known about this sooner, because if I had have, I would have sent my child right from the beginning, and we would have saved a lot of pain."
And maybe I
Essentially.
can just add.
Yep.
We did, the reason why, and we wrote to Trustee Lyra about not changing or not exploring further the changing of the name. And we made that decision in January because we knew that there was this program review coming. And so why would we take the time now to change the name of a program when that's the name that people have been using the last 20, 30 years, what have you? And there's this review happening. So it's not like the door is closed on that opportunity. What I would also say is that there has been incredibly little communication from the board about this program. And so I remember when we became ASAC chairs a couple of years ago, it still said that Grant was closing on the alternative schools page of the board. It said that Grant was closing and Regina would be opening as an alternative school. And at the time, I think Regina had been open as an alternative school for about 3 years. So that even just the basic one page on the website for the alternative program was really out of date. That being said, once we flagged that, and we also had a turnover of we had about 4 superintendents looking after a committee over about 2 years. We have Superintendent Hannah, who is incredibly supportive. We have met with communications. They are ready to do a promo video for us. They're ready to help us do an info night. They're ready to help us do a flyer. So we know that the communications team would like to support us when we provide the content. It's just that there's a program review happening right now. So we look forward to getting beyond the program review and then working with you to create materials so that we can better inform the general public and board staff about our program.
And I do know we're short on time, I apologize, but there's also a lot of stigma we've understood towards students in the programs, by parents, by students, just calling names, just not being,
Especially at 7.
yeah, especially at the 7-8 level from what we've heard, but there is a misunderstanding, a widespread spread misunderstanding about the program. Thank you.
Thank you. And we will move on to Trustee Nash.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. And some of the questions that my trustees have asked at this point, having participated in ASAC meetings for the past 2 years, and seeing the breadth of the work that's before us, and the very thoughtful report that you did provide for the program review, I want to congratulate you for your work, because I know it's beyond the monthly meetings. It's meetings on weekends during the summer, and it's, yes, you have children. Of course, you have children in the program, but I know it's more than that for you. And on behalf of the alternative community, thank you very much for your work.
Thank you. And if I can just comment, we are almost out of, our youngest kids are in grade 5. But the reason why I'm at least doing this work is that this program has given so much to my child and my family. And I've seen how it has given, like, I'm just feeling super emotional. I have a friend who moved their child from a French immersion program in grade 2, and the child at the time was saying that they wanted to die. They were so unhappy at school, and they felt like such a failure, and they didn't see how things would end. And then within 2 weeks of being at an alternative school, that child loved school again and was like, their life was changing. And I've seen this again and again about how impactful this program is. And so I can't help but feel like I want to support this program to continue for a number of more decades so that it can have the positive impact that I see it having now.
And our next question is from Trustee Bell.
Thank you very much. I would like to learn more about what it would meaningfully look like to spread the tenants to all our elementary school programs. But we're not going to maybe discuss that right now. So my question for you is, has thought and consideration been given to including a tenant that looks at incorporating Indigenous people's ways and knowing, particularly the Algonquin Anishinaabe, the nation upon which we sit? It would be really great to hear if there has been thought, or there will be thought, and maybe connection with our Indigenous Education Council on exploring that opportunity going forward.
I can answer. I really value the question, and we have a tenet that is about community connectedness and just really creating community in the space that we're in, but nothing specific to the Indigenous communities and land and that connection, as you stated. And so we will bring that back and give it more discussion and thought. Thank you so much.
And my last questioner is Trustee Jennings.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to your your presentation and your obvious passion for the program. I was looking at your tenets, and the 4th tenet is, a multi-age grouping. Can you just sort of expand what that looks like?
Yeah, so we do purposeful multi-age grouping. So whereas you might hear some families or staff say, oh, I don't want my child in a split grade, or I don't want to teach a split grade. At alternative schools, we actually embrace split grades. And it's something that, like, for instance, at our school, we have 2 grade 1-2s, like 2 grade, like 4 5s, like purposefully we're making split grades. And we see that as an opportunity to kind of scaffold learning and to support students. Like, just because a student is in grade 5 doesn't mean that there aren't other things that they could be learning in other grades. I'm not speaking very clearly about this, but there's lots of opportunity. We're trying to meet students where they're at in terms of their learning journey. And there's also lots of opportunities for mentorship and learning, co-learning from other students. We also do purposeful multi-age groupings. Most of the schools, if not all of them, have something that, for instance, at Churchill, they call tree families. At Riverview, they call them something else. At Regina, they call them something else. And what that is when you enter in kindergarten, you are assigned a tree. So for instance, my child is in the birch family and he has a teacher, and there are kids from kindergarten to grade 6, all in the birch group. And at least once a month, they spend about half a day doing an activity of all those students in that multi-age grouping together. So you've got kids learning with a teacher, and that teacher, they stay in that same tree family the whole time through their education. So then what you see on the playground is that the grade 1s actually know kids in grade 4 and 5, and you see the grade 2s playing with the grade 4s. And all of a sudden, it becomes much more of a community, whole community, rather than just grade specific. My friends are the other kids in grade 5 or whatever. So that's just a couple of examples of how purposeful multi-age groupings work. There's other things like most of the schools, I think, do buddy work, that type of thing.
I think the only thing that I'll add is it just creates a really supportive community where I remember my kid in kindergarten, there was a grade 6 biking by, like, oh, Luke, how's it going? Like, you know, just the connections were being made, and you just got a sense that there were kids who had each other's backs of very different ages and who would connect in different ways. And I think one of the big things to say about the program is when we're asked what makes it different, and we've talked to some of the alternative principals about what they're seeing and other staff, and what we hear is really the intentionality around it. By having that set of tenets, folks are invited to think outside the box, to think in creative ways, and to really figure out how to apply those. Whereas if those weren't stated on their walls, they wouldn't feel the legitimacy or the opportunity to do that as much. And so I'll just state that.
Thank you so much for answering our questions and providing us with some really great detail for our consideration. Certainly, I know that all of us, even though there are not a lot of nights when we are usually able to attend, all of us really appreciate getting the regular invitations. And when people can take advantage of it, I think it's very much worthwhile. So on behalf of all of us, thank you so much for your presentation this evening, and I'm sure we will be seeing you again.
Thank you so much.
And that brings us to the next item on our agenda, which I believe is the briefing from the chair of the board. And so tonight, I would like to welcome our 3 new student trustees to their first regular board meeting of the school year. Just to the right of the director, in order, continuing around the table, we have Ezio Di Stefano, we have Sharanya Sivasathyanathan, and we have Jeffrey Zhang. And we really look forward to working with all of you through this year. Tomorrow, Wednesday, the 25th of September, is Rowan's Law Day. It honors the memory of OCDSB student Rowan Stringer, who died as a result of head injuries she sustained while playing rugby in 2013. The day is dedicated to promoting awareness of concussions and the importance of having strategies to prevent, identify, and manage them. To mark this day, OCDSB schools will have in-class education and discussions about concussions and concussion safety. On Monday, September the 23rd, Maplewood Secondary School opened its doors to its first cohort of students. I extend my heartfelt gratitude to the dedicated OCDSB staff who made this possible, and we thank the Maplewood community for their patience and understanding as we navigated the many construction delays. This school has been a long time coming, and the unrelenting advocacy of more than 25 years' worth of Stittsville families has been a major force. Your support has been invaluable. Students and staff are now working in their new classrooms, and they're excited to be embarking on this new chapter together. Coming up, Monday, the 30th of September, is the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, a day of mourning and remembrance for everyone, especially the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples, that offers an opportunity to reflect and honor survivors, their families, and their communities. It is also Orange Shirt Day, a day to recognize and educate students and communities on the sad history and legacy of Canadian residential schools. I would like to thank all educators, other staff, and community partners across the district for their efforts to highlight this learning and reflection, both this week and throughout the year. It's a vital part of our collective commitment to reconciliation. And finally, a reminder that the election of school council members must be held within 30 days of the start of the school year. Any parent or caregiver of a student enrolled in the school can be elected as a member of the school council. I encourage parents and caregivers to get involved and add their perspectives and advice to promote student achievement and well-being. That concludes my briefing. Are there any questions? And seeing none, we will go directly to the director's briefing.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Through you, Madam Chair. The Education Foundation of Ottawa is seeking committed, engaged, and passionate candidates to serve on its board of directors. In particular, they're looking for individuals with skills and experience related to marketing or legal experience. This is an excellent opportunity to support an organization that makes such a valuable contribution to our students. More details can be found on their website at educationfoundationottawa.ca. As the school year is now well underway, I would like to take this opportunity, to acknowledge the many heritage months that will take place over the course of the current school year. This month, for instance, acknowledged Ukrainian heritage. Next month recognizes German and Hungarian heritage as examples. The month of October also marks the beginning of Islamic History Month, a unique opportunity to recognize the extraordinary contributions of Muslim scholars and scientists to the field of medicine through the theme of health and healing that continue to enrich our lives today. Also next week, Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, will begin at the sundown on October 2nd and continue until October 4th. It marks the start of the year 5785 and the beginning of the 10 days of awe, which will conclude with Yom Kippur. This is an important time of celebration, introspection, and reflection for our Jewish families. If you'd like to know more, the diverse array of heritage months and days of significance are recognized and celebrated on the district's website. On a final note, a reminder for all parents, guardians, and caregivers that Friday, September 27th is a professional activity day, a PA day, meaning that all OCDSB schools will be closed to students. There will be no classes, and school staff will participate that day in learning focused on key ministry priorities, literacy and numeracy, as well as student well-being and safety. Thank you.
Thank you. And I have one question already from Trustee Lyra for you.
Thanks. Building on your start to school, could you give us an update on Maplewood?
Certainly, through you, Madam Chair, pleased that we have Maplewood School, as our chair has mentioned, up and running with students beginning on Monday, September 23rd, yesterday for our students. There are a number of areas of the school, although classrooms are up and running, that continue to be worked on to ensure completion of that, including the gymnasia, for instance. Classrooms seem to be up and running for our grades 7, 8, and 9 students, but that the construction will continue for a number of additional weeks. We don't have a set date for the entire closure, but not uncommon when new schools open that there's some additional work to do both inside and outside of the school, including landscaping. So happy to see the students begin, as our chair said, after a long awaited start, but some additional work that will continue, knowing that our safety inspections have passed, but that some work, for instance, the gyms will continue to take place over the fall period.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the director on his briefing? And I'm seeing none. So that brings us to item 10 on our agenda. We have here 3 sets of board meeting minutes. The regular board meeting from the 24th of June, 2024, the special board meeting that was held on the 19th of August, 2024, and the special meeting that was held on the 10th of September, 2024. Do we have a mover for all 3 to confirm all 3 sets of minutes? Trustee Presley, thank you. Seconded by Trustee Lyra. In any of those minutes, and please identify which ones if you have something, are there any errors or omissions? And I'm not seeing any. Therefore, I will call the question on confirming the minutes for those 3 meetings in June, August, and September. All those in favor? And opposed? And the motion is carried. Is there any business arising from any of those minutes? And I'm not seeing any hands here. So that brings us to matters for action. And that goes to receipt of Committee of the Whole report from the 10th of September. Vice Chair Milburn, please.
I will now move receipt of the 10th of September 2024 Committee of the Whole report.
Sorry, we need a seconder for receipt. Trustee Blackburn. Are there any errors or omissions in this report? And seeing none, I will call the question on receipt. All those in favor? And opposed? The motion is carried. Vice Chair Milburn.
There are no action items arising from these minutes.
So no recommendations, which brings us on to the next item, 12.2 for action. Receipt of the report from the Ad Hoc Policy Review Committee from the 5th of September. And back to you again, Vice Chair Milburn.
I will now move receipt of the September 12th, 2024 Ad Hoc Policy Committee report.
As seconder for that, Trustee Lyra, are there any errors or omissions in this report? No one else is noticing it, but I will flag one, and that is that Trustee Blackburn is recorded in the minutes as a guest. She is a member of the committee. So she should be listed differently. And if there are no other corrections to be made, I will call the question. All those in favor of receipt and opposed, the motion is carried. So we are back to you, Trustee Milburn.
On a motion by Trustee Lyra, which I will second, that policy P.048.gov board guiding principles be rescinded.
Is this a consent item? And I'm seeing no objection, so we will hold that for the consent items. Back to you, Trustee Milburn.
On a motion by Trustee Lyra, which I will second, that policy P.018 electronic meetings of the board and committees and meeting attendance attached as Appendix B to report 24-104 be approved as amended.
And That is not a consent item, so we will deal with it after we voted on the consent items. And there is nothing further in your report?
That's all, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. So at this point in time, in terms of the first of the recommendations from the committee, that policy P.048.gov board guiding principles be rescinded. Are we prepared to take any scribe vote on that? And the vote has now been opened.
Trustee Bell, can we have your vote, please?
I'm voting in favor. Unfortunately, my e-scribe has not loaded yet.
We're having a little difficulty with displaying that on the screen. However, the vote was carried unanimously with all trustees present and voting. That brings us then to item 12.3, the non-consent item, which is the motion relating to the electronic meetings policy. Trustee Lyra, you were the mover. Would you like introduction?
This policy is required by a change to provincial regulation. We don't have to be happy about it. We just have to do it. So I'm going to encourage all of my colleagues to support this.
Speakers to the electronics meetings policy? I will ask Trustee Milburn, please, if you could take the chair.
Yes, please go ahead, Madam Chair.
Thank you. One of the concerns that was expressed in the committee meeting was the huge burden that is placed on trustees and on the chair by the limited list of exemptions to be given to trustees to authorize them to participate electronically. And following some discussions with people from other school districts and with OPSPA, I would like to propose an amendment. The message that I was hearing from a variety of sources was that it was important for the board to be reasonable. Now, reasonable is a hard word to define, and therefore I think some definitions are in order. I would like to present some draft language on the screen. Can we make it any bigger so that people can read it? That arose from what I was proposing. And basically, there are some definitions which would already apply that are in our existing policies, and we're putting definitions at the end of things. So that I think the definition of disability, we could make reference to the standard definition of disability that we already have. But the other definitions are a little bit more difficult because we don't have definitions for everything. And without definitions, it's harder to know. So what I would like to propose by way of amendment is that we make reference to the existing definitions and that we add the additional definitions
Chair
to broad-
Scott, do we not need a seconder for the amendments before you put it on the floor for introduction?
Oh, you didn't ask for a seconder? I thought you had got a
not.
seconder.
I had not, and then you, if you are amending it, you then get to restart your timer for 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So who would like to second trustee Scott's? Trustee Lee will be the seconder. Right, trustee Scott, you get 5 minutes for introduction.
Okay, I won't need five more minutes. So basically, what I would like to do is propose that we add language to the policy to incorporate these definitions, the reference to the existing definition, a modification of the weather conditions definition, and the addition of 2 new definitions, health-related issues and family responsibilities, which are not in our current list of delegations. And if there is a wish for people to do sub-amendments to these, I am amenable to that. I appreciate very much the assistance I had from our staff in putting these together. But I hope trustees will be willing to give them good consideration.
All right, thank you, Chair Scott. I am going to propose a 2-minute recess so that we can all read the definitions. If staff could email it to all trustees, or if we can scroll, but a 2-minute recess just so that we can digest the information and then we can go into questions about the amendments that are on the floor to the policy. So 2 minutes and we will be back. Thank you.
Point of privilege, I don't have access to the revisions.
All right, I'm going to be calling the meeting back to order. So the definitions are on our screen, and for trustees around the room, definitions are also in our email. I'm going to hand it over to staff to comment on any of the definitions and the validity of changing these definitions. And then we will enter speaking from all trustees.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Just a couple points first on the weather conditions definition. Firstly, there's a bit of a typo that we'll need to address through the amendment if there's going to be an amendment. The last part of the sentence says, any weather or could create. It should say any weather that could create. So just a grammatical piece there. And then more broadly on that weather conditions definition, it notes there in the email that you'd have received that weather conditions definition comes from PR 681. In fact, it's a slightly modified version of PR 681's definition in that it adds the could create unsafe road conditions or significant driving delays piece. That is not in the original definition. So just so that's clear. Broadly about all of the definitions, we've looked at them internally. We don't have any particular concerns with these definitions from a regulatory compliance point of view at this stage as they're framed in this amendment. So, but we're happy to answer any specific questions that might come up or that trustees may have about the language that you see there. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Steph. I have a speakers list started. I have trustee Lyra, then trustee Kaplan-Murth, then trustee Dixon. Oh, sorry, trustee Lyra, hit the wrong button.
Thanks. First, I'd like to ask that we break out family responsibilities from the other three. I think that it's going to be easier to discuss one at a time. And then I'm going to ask that we move to rules of committee for what I hope will be a discussion and not a board debate.
All right, thank you, trustee Lyra. I'm just going to look for confirmation from the executive officer that I don't need a motion on the floor to move to rules of committee. I do need a motion on the floor. So trustee Lyra,
So moved.
you have moved. All right, so we are now going to vote on the motion on the floor. We need a seconder. Who would like to second the motion? Trustee Dixon, we are now going to vote on the motion on the floor to move to rules of committee. All those in favor? And that carries. So as a reminder, folks, for rules of committee, when we are discussing the amendments, there will be more than one time that you can speak, but you will be speaking for 3 minutes at a time, and we will be keeping track of the speakers list at the chair. So trustee Lyra, your time can continue now.
Okay. So I'd like to start, if we're breaking them out one at a time, which ones are we starting with?
Let's start with disability, weather conditions, and health-related issues, but I'm going to look around the room. Does everyone want to break out each definition one by one and discuss it? I'm not seeing any nodding heads, so we will do those first three together.
Okay. So I have a question about weather condition and whether or not flights should be in there. I know that I have missed a meeting because a flight from a conference I was at got delayed on the way back due to a weather condition, it was a mechanical issue, but it was a mechanical issue based on a weather report for something beyond my control. And I'm wondering what the impact would be on, because it talks about driving conditions. What are the ramifications for flights or other modes of transportation?
Thank you, trustee Lyra. We'll look to staff to comment.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I don't see any initial concerns. I think the thrust there is the weather conditions and the delays that that's causing. I don't think that the focus really of that provision is on the driving delays and the road specifically. It's about the delay caused by the weather. So I think it seems consistent. I'm happy to hear otherwise from legal counsel if he disagrees. Okay, I think I'm getting a nod of approval there.
Could we speak to whether or not mechanical issues on a flight would apply? Like solely mechanical issues?
Through you, Chair, I think we're maybe stepping outside the weather conditions thrust. I think, to be candid, we've already extended a little bit beyond that based on the specific wording in the regulation. I think extending further might cause us to be a bit outside the bounds of what's intended by the regulation.
I see. Okay. Then I have no further concerns with the weather definition or the health-related issues or the disability definitions.
All right, thank you, Trustee Lyra. Trustee Kaplan-Murth.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I support the amendments, but I think that just in terms of talking to these three issues, we need to, if it were on the screen, it would be helpful, but the wording in terms of whether or not, we're talking about physical health, mental health, other disabilities, that's great. We haven't stipulated here whether it's at the discretion of the chair as to whether or not those are considered valid, or whether you take for granted that the trustee who says that there is a health issue is correct in saying that there's a health issue. So we talked a lot about in policy about whether or not we would need a medical note and whether or not you would need evidence to support having said disability, mental health issue, physical health issue. I just wanted to, I don't know if we, in this definition, it says, it doesn't explain how that is going to be determined. So is that something that we just leave as is and we assume that the chair will take the word of the person that they're not malingering, or?
I will
what
look
is
to the
the
mover
motion?
of the motion to answer the intention of the amendment for the definition. You're the mover of the motion?
We did discuss that in committee. And it was not the will of the committee to put in something giving the chair any ability to possibly request evidence. But I mean, if the expectation is to be reasonable about it, then I would expect that most of the time the chair would be taking someone's word for it on the theory that the word was good.
Perfect. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that that was the conclusion that we landed on, and of course the same would apply for the, weather conditions and so on if somebody cannot drive safely and so on and so forth. So I'm happy with that, and I'm happy with the with those revisions. So thank you for doing that.
All right, thank you, Trustee Kaplan-Murth. Trustee Dixon?
My question that I had was clarified by Trustee Nelly, so I'm fine with that.
All right, thank you, Trustee Dixon. So are there any other speakers to the first three definitions as the amendment on the floor? Yes, Trustee Lee.
I just want to clarify that the wording in red was not adopted, and that shouldn't be there. Regarding the mechanical
Yes,
flight.
sorry, apologies for the confusion on the screen. Okay. So the first three definitions about disability, weather conditions, and health-related issues is currently on the floor as an amendment. So we will vote on these, and then we will move on to the family responsibilities amendment. So I am thinking this is not an e-scribe vote, so this is going to be an at-hand. Yes, Trustee Kaplan-Murth.
Sorry, through you, Chair. I had a question, and this might be a good time to ask it. But my understanding is that as of September of 2025, even if people are exempted for these reasons, if you miss 3 meetings, if you do not attend at least 3 meetings in person within a 12-month period, the seat is considered vacant, and that is totally irrespective of these exemptions. So, is that? Am I understanding that correctly?
Legal counsel or executive officers, can you please comment on the question from Trustee Kaplan-Murth?
Sorry, through you, Chair, to be quite frank, we were discussing a separate issue here. Can the question be repeated, please?
Yes, my understanding is that as of September of 2025, even if a person is exempted, let's say they're exempted because of physical issues or other issues, even if they're granted exemption, if they miss 3 meetings, if they don't attend at least 3 meetings within a 12-month period, their seat is considered vacant according to the ministry's new guidelines.
Sorry, through your chair, we're just discussing here. Give us maybe 1 minute just to confirm.
Through you, Chair, just trying to find a clearer answer for you, but in the interim, I just wanted to point out that the exemption provisions in the regulation and in the draft procedure are not about being absent from board meetings. They're about permission to attend a board meeting electronically. So I just want to make sure we distinguish between those two things.
Yeah, that is correct, and that is what I'm saying. But I'm pretty sure that the ministry's new guidelines say that if we don't attend in person at least 3 times in a 12-month period, even if we've been exempted, if we don't show up 3 times, our seat is considered vacant, irrespective of the reasons for exemption.
That's the current rule as well. If you do not attend 3 board meetings in person, your seat is vacated. Executive Officer, do you have an answer?
So I guess first I'm not sure it's necessarily relevant to the definitions. It might be relevant to the overall discussion. But that section of the regulation is revoked as of September 1st, at which time there are a number of sections in the regulation that are revoked. And so I think, as we had mentioned at committee, what we will need to do is bring this policy, is undertake a review of this policy later in the school year to make any additional adjustments that might be required for the changes that are due to be put in place as of September 1, 2025. I think there's a couple of different pieces. There is currently a provision in the Education Act that still applies, and that goes to missing 3 consecutive meetings, for example, where there's a deemed vacancy. This requirement, which is in place until September 1, 2025, requires that you attend in person, that trustees attend in person for at least 3 meetings during any 12-month period, which runs from November 15th. So in effect, what the requirement is that between November 15th of this year and August 31st of 2025, all board members are required to attend at least 3 meetings in person. So these exemptions can apply to a multitude of other meetings, but there have to be at least 3 occasions when a trustee attends in person during that time frame, based on the way the regulation reads at this point.
Yes, thank you.
All right, so I'm seeing no other speakers on the floor. So we are going to vote on the amendment to add the new definitions that are currently on our screen for disability, weather conditions, and health-related issues. All those in favor of adding these definitions? And that carries unanimously. So now we are moving on to the family responsibilities definition, and we will start a speakers list for the family's responsibility definition. Trustee Presley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, I'm wondering if I could get a comment from staff as to whether increasing the size of your family, so say such as being in the process of an adoption, would fall under family responsibilities.
Executive Officer, Legal Counsel.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. My short answer would be yes. I think it would include those types of situations. Oftentimes when we're talking about family responsibility within the law, we're talking about childcare, things related to childcare, which would include things like adoption, welcoming a new child to the family. So I think that likely would be captured by this definition.
No further questions.
All right, thank you, Trustee Presley. Are there any additional speakers to the item on the floor? Trustee Lara?
If that is the executive officer's interpretation, do we need to specifically put that into policy?
Through you, Chair, I'm not sure I understand the question. Maybe you can clarify.
So you have said that family responsibilities would include something such as an adoption. It's not explicitly listed. Is it your opinion that that needs to be explicitly listed if it were to be included?
Thank you. Through you, Chair, I think the language of necessary family-related activities is quite a broad piece of language that could be interpreted to include what we're discussing here. I don't think that we want to necessarily start laying out all the possible necessary related activities. I think Trustee Scott made it clear that OPSPA was also encouraging us to be broad in our definitions, and I think starting to set out specific enumerated examples could end up constraining the decision-making going forward.
I see. Thank you.
Trustee Jenkins?
Thank you. So under family responsibilities, at the last part of the sentence, including activities necessary to provide financially for family. Can you give an example of what that means?
I can give you, I'm hesitant to go into hypotheticals because I don't want to go down the line of, someone in the future saying, well, that was the specific example given by the executive officer. I think what we're envisioning there is that part of providing for a family often involves some level of work and employment related responsibilities. And I think that is generally the purpose for that piece of the provision, although I would potentially say that Trustee Scott might have her own views on this, and perhaps she may want to comment on that, as part of the dialogue here.
Trustee Scott, do you care to comment?
We've all seen situations where trustees who had, for example, jobs on the Hill were required to be in attendance on the Hill on the same night as a board meeting because they were working for a member of parliament or a cabinet minister or what have you. We have also seen situations where trustees have had jobs that from time to time required them to travel so that they were necessarily away from Ottawa for one or more meetings because of that work-related travel. And if you are a person, particularly in a senior position, but also in a junior position, and your boss says you have to be here, you don't always have a lot of choice about the matter.
All right, thank you, Trustee Scott. Trustee Jenkins?
Well, I guess, yes, and thank you, Chair Scott, for that clarification. Although, what about activities that you are responsible, or you are in sharing responsibility with your partner in your family structure, that it's important for you to, and it's quite possible I'm not going to make any sense here, that your financial support to your family prevents you from being here in person. Is that part of this? Do you?
Trustee Jenkins, I'm sorry, I might have to ask you to clarify because I'm not sure I understand. Unless if staff understands, then they can respond. So I'm hearing a few staff whispers, and I think that the intent here, and the mover of the motion can correct me, is that is one of the scenarios is to help with what you were saying. Does that make sense? Does the mover of the motion wish to comment as well? That would be Chair Scott.
It's an issue that if you are working to provide support for your family, and that's why most of us have jobs, that is a family responsibility. And if your work requires you to be somewhere else, and if you're not there, you risk losing your position and your ability to support your family. That would be a reasonable thing. And I believe, for example, I'm not sure, someone told me once that there were exemptions, for example, if you were military and were posted somewhere. But there are other things also that are important that would require you to be elsewhere for one meeting or another meeting.
Trustee Jenkins, does that answer the
So
question?
thank you. So that, yes, that clarifies it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Trustee Kaplan-Murth?
Thank you, through you, Chair. So I'm going to just play devil's advocate here and say that any of us who have a job or who have children would be much more able to be present in our jobs and with our children if we joined electronically rather than taking the 2 hours that it takes to drive on the Queensway. So how is it that some people can choose to, for example, live outside of the country and not have to be present, whereas others who live in the country but have all the different reasons that we need to be with our families or with our workplaces, have to leave work and leave our families 2 hours early and drive here, come rain or shine?
I think this regulation was imposed by the Ontario Ministry of Education. So we are trying to work within the parameters and propose new language. I'm going to hand it over to staff to provide any comment as well.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, the reality is that this definition is broadly worded, and it could capture activities that we are not necessarily able to even envision at this point. That is a reality of a broad definition. However, there's nothing from our point of view that would prevent us legally passing this as our definition to fit within the scope of the regulation. So it's really a matter for the trustees to decide if this is the definition they want, but it is accurate that it is a broad definition, but it is also accurate that from our point of view, it fits within the scope of the regulation.
Okay, so I guess my question though is, if we're going to apply it unevenly and only some people don't have to be here in person, whereas other people have to take it upon ourselves to leave work early and leave our children and not be committing to all of our other responsibilities, then are we agreeing today that all of us could say, if we work or if we have children or other responsibilities, that we are de facto covered under this and could attend as many meetings as we wanted to, minus those 3 electronically?
I will hand it to the mover of the motion to explain the intention behind this definition.
As I said in the beginning, I am open to modifications to these draft definitions. And if somebody wished, for example, to amend out the phrase, including activities necessary to provide financially for family, I think the other pieces are mostly things that really do need to be there. But if there are pieces of it or other necessary family-related activities, if someone wished to amend one or both of those things out or take out education or whatever, that is up to the board to decide. This is just inclusive language, and the board does not have to accept any or all of it.
All right, Trustee Kaplan-Murth, back to you if you would like to propose an amendment.
I'm not proposing an amendment. I'm asking for a clarification, because as it stands, all of us around the table, if we have jobs or children, should be automatically exempted from attending meetings in person, except for the 3 meetings that are required for us to maintain our seats. And so if that is the case, then I'm fine with it. If that's not the case, then we need to review what we're agreeing to.
I'm going to hand it back to the mover of the motion for any further clarification.
I don't think it goes to just because you have children. Because there are clear expectations in terms of supervision of children who are under, say, 12 years old, which would not apply necessarily to older children. If you don't have a sitter and and your spouse, if you have one, is not at home, somebody has to look after and supervise your young child. But that's not necessarily going to be true for all in terms of needing to provide supervision for young children. There are rules around that. And I'm sure that there are some limitations to a number of the other aspects as well, which being reasonable would have to be understood. But I would also look to staff if they have any further comment on that.
Staff, if you have further comment.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I guess what I would say is that the way the regulation and our policy is laid out is that it is essentially on a case-by-case basis in terms of whether or not a trustee is able to attend in person. And if they are not for any of the reasons that are articulated, then the process is that they would request make a request to the chair to participate electronically based on one of these reasons. What we heard previously are two things in terms of the application of this. One is to take a broad approach, and the other is a reasonableness one. And so I guess in response to the question, there isn't a limit in terms of the number of times that a trustee can make that request. It's really whether or not the reason for the request can be grounded in one of these circumstances, subject only to the provision that was referred to earlier, which is an expectation that notwithstanding whether or not these reasons might apply in every case, that there is an expectation that trustees attend in person for at least 3 meetings in the course of 12 months.
All right, thank you, staff. Trustee Kaplan-Murth.
Okay, I don't have any further questions. I think I've made my point. Thank you.
All right, Trustee Bell.
Thank you very much. I see this clause as, by and large, an equity seeking clause. I know in my conversations with people who have considered stepping up and running to be a trustee, they have said, but what about when life happens? What about when your child is, we have the health related, is sick? Or what about if I don't make enough money for the month and I get an extra shift? It's not, obviously, when people step up to be a trustee, they do so with the greatest intent. But when we take into account their intersectional realities that hinder them often from making these sort of contributions to society, there are a lot of considerations, and many of which people don't want to be public, specifically when it comes to making a family. I'm not going to go into details of my case when it comes to family-related responsibilities, fertility journey, adoption. There's many things that you can imagine someone in my situation could face. And that's why many people have to make the decisions they can, but yet they still come up and they do their best to represent their community and show up at every single meeting. And so I think this clause is absolutely essential to allowing equity-seeking groups to be able to participate and do their best to represent their communities while taking into account what their family needs are on a day-to-day and in the big picture. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Trustee Bell. Trustee Lyra, then Trustee Scott, and then Trustee Dixon.
All right. I have a question about the definition of family. Not all of the people around the board table have a spouse or children and still need to work because food is expensive. And I'm wondering if the definition of family includes just that individual.
Through you, Chair, this is actually set out in the regulation. So it's enumerated who counts as family for the purposes of this definition. We haven't included that in this definition here, but by necessity, it has to refer back to the policy, which refers back to the regulation, and that sets out, I can read them out, but essentially the spouse, parent, step-parent, foster parent, child, stepchild, foster child, there's other children here, a relative of the member who is a dependent, or a person who is dependent on the member for care or assistance. And those are specified as the only categories that apply in terms of who counts as family. I hope that answers the question. It's in the regulation essentially.
So the question I asked specifically is the individual trustee a part of their own family? Because an individual trustee with none of the people you have listed, no spouse, no dependents, who still needs to work.
Sorry, I think I understand the question now. As I read the regulation, that's not the intention. The intention to refer to family, if it intended to refer to the member, it would refer to the member. It doesn't refer to the member, it refers to family responsibilities. You have to read that purposefully. And if you're reading that purposefully, the legislature or the regulation specifically refers to something other than the member, whereas in the rest of the regulation, they refer to the member. Because they haven't referred to the member in this piece, we have to presume they mean someone other than the member, which is someone in their family, not themselves.
So to be clear, an individual trying to earn their own living who does not have a dependent is not covered under this clause.
Through you, Chair, that's my understanding, yes.
All right, I'd like to amend it. Give me a moment to find some language.
Trustee Lara, can I ask you to go back onto the speakers list so that we can do an amendment? All right, thank you. Trustee Scott, then Trustee Dixon, then Trustee Kaplan-Murth.
I didn't have my hand up.
Apologies. Then Trustee Dixon.
I guess I'm looking for a little bit more clarification. So when we're talking about family-related activity, I have grandchildren. Do we include grandkids into this? So does that mean if I have an activity that conflicts with the time that the board meeting is, and I have a great distance to travel and I don't feel I can get here on time, does that allow us to be able to zoom into the meeting?
I'll look to the mover of the motion first, which is Trustee Scott, and then staff can follow up with any comment.
I just need clarification, please.
The rules in the regulation and in the draft policy, as I understand it, are not about being late for a meeting. They are about not being able to attend the meeting at all. So if your family responsibilities require you to be late, that's not a problem if you eventually get there.
Just to clarify the question, I believe Trustee Dixon was asking if she requests it, an electronic meeting link, would it be provided under that scenario?
If she had to care for dependent grandchildren, then that would, I think, fall under this because it is included in the list of the spouse, parent, step-parent, foster parent, person who is dependent on the member, a relative who is dependent on the member for care or assistance. That's pretty broad.
Trustee Dixon?
Thank you for that. I just want to make sure. So with that being said, I can come to 3 meetings within a 12-month period with those responsibilities. Am I correct?
So to clarify your question, as long as you come to 3 board meetings in person, 3 board meetings or committee of the whole meetings in person within the time frame, if you are unable to attend for one of the following reasons as identified under family responsibilities, that will be allowed and that will grant you a virtual link. That's what you're asking, just to clarify. Staff, would you care to comment?
Through you, Chair. So first on the parent-child situation, Trustee Scott, I believe, said it accurately, which is Grandchild is not specifically listed in the regulation, but what is listed here is a child who is under a legal guardianship. It also lists a relative who's dependent on the member and a person who is dependent on the member. So it's pretty broad in terms of someone who's dependent on the member. In terms of the missing the, attending 3 meetings, and is that kind of sufficient? I think I heard that to be the question. That doesn't change. I don't think that's always been the case. Absences happen, and if there are not at least 3 meetings at which you're attending the board meetings, then yes, that would amount to vacating a seat. But that's not changed by this regulation. This regulation is about getting permission to attend electronically. And I understand why maybe we're conflating those issues a bit, but I'm not sure if I'm being clear even to you, because I'm looking.
I'm not being clear.
But I think the short answer is the rules around attendance are still the same as they were. That hasn't changed. That's always been the case in terms of having to attend at least 3 board meetings.
So I just want to be clear. Going forward, if I have an activity that I deem that I need to attend, and I can zoom in to that meeting, correct? Because like I see weather up here too, like if it's a snowstorm and driving 2.5 hours where I feel that is going to be a danger to myself, I can zoom in. I just want to be clear, because I don't want to be zooming in and then I'm not allowed to come back with a conflict.
If
Through you-
staff can answer, please.
Sure, through you, Chair. That's not quite right. If you have a reason that fits under one of these definitions, and in this particular case, we're talking about family responsibility, and if you have family responsibility tied to one of the people listed, including the dependents, then you may request a permission from the chair to attend electronically, and if the chair is satisfied that those conditions have been met, the chair can grant you that permission to attend electronically. But it's not a kind of, the decision lies with the chair to grant that permission.
Okay. And then one last question. So if I wanted to take a sabbatical, let's say, and be absent for 2 months, that could be granted also, right? And I could zoom in within that 12-month period.
Through you again, Chair. The electronic attendance, the zooming in, if you will, is separate and distinct from the sabbatical piece. The attending electronically is only for the purposes identified in the regulation. And in this case, for family responsibilities with those individual people. The sabbatical piece is a separate question, and to be quite frank, I don't know all of what might be available to members in terms of sabbaticals. I know that there are options for parental leave, I believe, is one of them. I'm not sure what other options might be available, but just taking a sabbatical, if assuming there is some way to do that, would not grant permission, would not put the chair in a position where she has to grant permission to attend electronically. She would still have to look at the reasons for the request to attend electronically, and those reasons would have to be enumerated in the regulation.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, Trustee Kaplan-Meier, then Trustee Lauer, then Trustee Lee. Oh, sorry, Trustee Lee, you were first-time speaker. You can go first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the discussion is going a little bit sideways with respect to the intention behind the regulation and the policy. I think the intention behind the regulation and the policy that we're trying to adopt is that the expectation is for us to be in person, and this policy is just a means for us to establish the ground rules for the odd time and the reasons why we are allowed to be virtual on a meeting. I think a little bit of the discussion has kind of devolved into being able to miss more meetings than we attend, which I don't think is the intention behind why we are adopting this and why the ministry has proposed that or implemented that regulation. So I think we just need to kind of focus back into the intention behind the regulation.
Thank you, Trustee Lee, Trustee Kaplan-Meier, and Trustee Lyra.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I would like to move an amendment that that clause around family responsibilities ends with family-related activities, period, and then a separate paragraph begins workplace and financial responsibilities, including activities necessary to provide for self or family.
Trustee Scott is the mover of the motion. I will give staff one moment to add that to the screen. Would that be a friendly amendment?
So it would be a new paragraph. So to take out the comma after activities, it's a new paragraph, and it would say work. It would be work and financial responsibilities. Including activities necessary to provide financially for self and family or family.
I don't see it as a friendly amendment.
All right, so now we will be discussing, I will give staff a moment to highlight the amendment on the screen.
Can I explain why?
Is family-related activities also?
No,
Yeah.
that's
No,
fine.
it was right there. Okay. Trustee Kaplan-Meier, you get 3 minutes for introduction.
Okay, thank you. This is just to, this addresses the issue that was raised by Trustee Lyra. It also addresses the issue of, you know, there are going to be situations in which for work or financial reasons, people need to join electronically in order to be able to be present. Goes back to what Trustee Bell said in terms of equity. There are some people who do shift work and they can't lose shifts. There are some people who have responsibilities, like we talked about the military. I mean, okay, there's also medicine. There are lots of jobs in which you might need to work longer hours, and the difference between working longer hours and then joining virtually versus working shorter hours and getting here in person can mean saving lives or not saving lives. So I think, you know, that is, and obviously in keeping with what Trustee Lee said, this is not to necessarily say that a person would never join in person, but that there are definitely legitimate reasons for work and financial reasons. And if a person has work or financial responsibilities, just like with family responsibilities, just like with health issues, they shouldn't have to do much to advocate for that. I would hope that with reasonableness, the chair would understand reasons arise and would respect trustees' requests. So I think that this is just one element that has been missed, and it addresses the issue also of people for whom supporting one's self might just be one person, or it could also be a single parent family where there isn't a spouse, or perhaps you can't afford childcare, and so on and so forth. There's lots of reasons why you need to work. So I think it just goes with everything else. I don't think it's too controversial.
I'm going to ask for staff to comment if this is in line with regulation, and then I'm going to go to my speakers list, please.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, I don't think that this amendment can be supported by the regulation. If this amendment was to be passed, it would put the chair in a position of having to potentially grant an exception under the policy, but then in doing so, violate the law. And so I don't think this amendment can stand for the same reasons that I gave to Trustee Lyra earlier about the distinction between self and family. The regulation is about family responsibilities, not about self. And I think this would create a conflict between the policy and the regulation.
All right, thank you, staff. My speakers list, I have Trustee Scott, then Trustee Lee.
Executive Officer Mark has captured one of my concerns, and that is that the regulation itself has already in effect defined family. And the family that is referred to does not include self in the regulation. The other problem I have with this proposed amendment is the reference to work and financial responsibilities, because that just becomes very confusing, since the focus, the purpose of the definition is to have an understanding of what family responsibilities are, and work responsibilities are not family responsibilities. Although the activities necessary to provide for the family could be considered a family responsibility. But I think the modified wording, part of it is contrary to the regulation, part of it is just plain confusing.
All right, thank you, Trustee Scott. Trustee Lee?
My request was just for the chair to make a ruling of whether this amendment was in order or out of order based on the comments from the executive officer and Trustee Scott.
Executive Officer, did you say that this was not in line with the regulation, and if we pass it, it would put us in conflict with the regulation and with the law?
Yes, Chair.
All right, then I unfortunately have to rule this out of order. Trustee Kaplan-Murth, we can go back to your speaking time.
Okay, thanks. But you already had the words financial responsibility in the previous clause, right? So you were already including financial responsibility as something that would pertain to a family, but now you're saying, but financial responsibility doesn't pertain to an individual, and that's discriminatory against single people. We have listed every reason under the sun that a person can be exempted, except for work, which is discriminatory against people who have to work. So I'm not sure where we go with this, but this is, we're making exceptions where we want to make exceptions, and we're disregarding people who actually have to work for a living. So I would like maybe some comment from, I don't know, General Counsel or Executive Officer as to why it was okay to have provide financially in the previous paragraph, but it's not okay to say that also people who maybe don't have families or maybe do have families but just need to work to support them can't be a separate paragraph.
Legal Counsel, would you be able to comment, please?
Through you, Chair. I guess there's a couple of things happening at the same time. I'm trying to distill it. One of the issues was around, in my mind, reference to self or family, because the reference to self, in my read of it, is contrary to the regulation. I understand the intent behind it, but we are constrained by the language in the regulation. With respect to the reference to financial responsibilities, I don't think that language is in there. It says necessary to provide financially for family. I mean, clearly this is the clause in the amendment that's causing the most question. And I think, the reason for that is that, as Trustee Lee said earlier, these provisions are meant to be exceptions to the rule. And if we're talking about having a requirement to attend work, I understand there might be a travel component, but if it's about the requirement to attend work in order to provide for family, again, these provisions are about attending electronically. If you're attending work, a trustee is not in a position to attend electronically, right? Then they may need to be absent because they have to attend work. I understand that. There is provision in the regulation for being absent from a meeting, but that's different than attending electronically.
So I just want to,
Trustee Kaplan-Murth, you had run out of time. Would you like to go back on the speaker's list?
Oh, sure.
All right, Trustee Lara, then apologies. Trustee Blackburn, you are a first-time speaker, if I'm not mistaken, so you can go first. You're speaking to the amendment that's on the floor for family responsibilities, just as a reminder.
Okay, then I don't need to speak because the amendment that I was going to speak to is gone.
Okay, thank you, trustee Blackburn. Trustee Lara?
I'd like a legal opinion on a person who is dependent on the member and how that excludes the member themselves.
Through you, Chair, perhaps trustee Lyra can clarify her question.
Sure. So one of the people listed under family is a person who is dependent on the member, correct?
That's that's the plain reading of it,
Yeah.
yes.
So my question is, how is the member themselves not a person dependent on the member for financial success or for financial?
Through you, Chair, the answer is the same essentially as the answer I gave to self. And it gets back to when we're interpreting legislation or regulation, we look at how language is used. And throughout this regulation, the term member is used to refer to things that apply to the member. In this specific part of the regulation, that's not what's done. We're referring to, in that section that you referred to, we're referring to a person, not the member. The sentence also goes on, a person who is dependent on the member. The plain reading of that is that there's two people involved there. There's the person and there's the member. And so I think your question, I think Trustee Lyra's question was essentially, can the member not be the person? Cannot not be the one and the same? And I don't see any reasonable reading of this regulation where that could be the interpretation.
In my opinion, we're already doing some creative stretching to get work included. Work was not mentioned at all in the original regulation. And if we're doing some creative stretching, we should do some more creative stretching in the name of equity. I think it is disappointing that we have decided to draw the lines, I guess, where we did. I suspect you're going to rule this out of order, but I'm going to put it on the floor nonetheless. I'd like to move a motion to add for oneself and or one's family. On the basis that I believe that a person dependent on the member can include the member, and it would certainly be an interesting legal case.
I'm going to look for comment from the executive officers, or if this would be within order and within the regulation and legal, or our legal counsel.
Chair, I think this is the same answer as what we gave before, which was, while the language is slightly different, the thrust is the same. And I think the answer is the same as well, which is that this would place the provision outside the scope of the intention of the regulation.
All right, thank you very much. Then I'm going to be ruling this out of order.
Okay. I have no further amendments to this paragraph.
Thank you, Trustee Lara. Trustee Kaplan-Meier.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, I would like to seek legal opinion from somebody outside of our board on this issue, because I think that we're misinterpreting whether or not it can be an individual or a family. Are we allowed to request?
We can't get a legal opinion now, since we have no one that is outside of the board that can provide a legal opinion. Executive officers, I think if we are looking for a legal opinion, we will have to
Sorry, Chair, I see you looking at me, but I was in the midst of discussing something. Was there a further question?
Yeah,
So I
so
missed it,
to
sorry.
confirm, we cannot seek an outside legal opinion tonight because we have no outside legal counsel for the school board. If that was to be requested, it would not come before our vote that we are going to be voting on tonight. So I now need 2 minutes to consult with staff, please, and we will be right back. All right, I will now be calling this meeting back to order. I'm just confirming that we have quorum around the room, and we do. So I'm going to hand it to the executive officer for comment on what was on the floor about seeking an outside legal opinion.
Thank you, Chair. And through you, first point of clarity is when the folks up here are providing feedback and answering questions, none of what we say is legal opinions. Sure, some of us are lawyers when we answer the questions, but we're answering these as, you know, staff here, consultants. Now, we're providing information essentially from our perspectives as staff, not as lawyers. With that said, we obviously can't seek a legal opinion tonight, and certainly not an outside one. There's no practical way to do that. What we could do, or what is a possibility, is to add a clause to the motion currently on the floor to require staff to seek a legal opinion after tonight and to report back to the board with the outcome of that legal opinion. However, if you want to add that clause, you'll obviously need to add that as an amendment. Someone will need to move that as an amendment. You'll need to vote on the amendment to add that clause, and then also vote on this amendment, and then also vote on the main adoption of the policy. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you, Executive Officer. So I'm going to,
Sorry.
oh, sorry. I'm going to hand it to the mover of motion, and then back to Trustee Kaplan-Murth for her speaking time.
It almost makes sense, Madam Chair, but not quite. Because if we want to add a clause requesting that a legal opinion be sought on this particular matter, that should be to the main motion, not to the amendment. That an amendment to the main motion, if we include this, but it would be added as a separate amendment to the main motion as opposed to a sub-amendment to this. Just to make sure everybody understands.
All right, thank you, Trustee Scott. So back to you, Trustee Kaplan-Murth.
Okay, thank you. Through you, Chair, just to clarify, what I'm hearing is that in order to seek an actual legal opinion as opposed to our discussing whether or not we think it does or doesn't fit, we need to have a motion on the floor. I can just simply put on a motion on the floor saying, including activities necessary to provide financially for self or family, and ask that we seek an opinion as to whether or not that is acceptable, because I think otherwise we are discriminating against individuals, which is not cool.
So to clarify, you're seeking to amend, including activities necessary to provide financially for family seeking a legal opinion?
Didn't understand what you just asked.
I too am a bit
I'm
confused.
asking for an amendment that says, including activities necessary to provide financially for self and or family. It's just this, I'm just adding self and or family to that final sentence.
Okay, so you are saying including activities necessary to provide financially for self or family. We are first going to go, so that is a proposed amendment, which we just, so to
On a
confirm.
point of order, Madam Chair, that cannot be, amendment cannot be moved until we have dealt with the amendment that's already on the floor.
I believe she was proposing a
This is sub-amendment.
sub-amendment, but
And
I
it is
am.
not a legitimate sub-amendment because it is germane to the motion as a whole, as opposed to being germane to a particular piece of it. I think it has to be part of the larger board action.
No, and thank you, Chair Scott. What I'm understanding is that all we are adding, if we scroll up, is including activities necessary to provide financially for self, highlighted, or family. And given the legal opinion, or given the consultation that we've already received from staff, that would put us in violation of the regulation. So I will be ruling this out of order as a sub-amendment.
But I was specifically asking for an actual legal opinion on that.
But trustee Kaplan-Meier, we explained through the executive officers that pending a legal opinion has to be to the main motion on the floor, which this is not. This is to a amendment to add the definition of family responsibilities on the floor. If you would like to add that as amendment to the main motion, once we are done discussing this amendment, you can do so.
So I'm sorry, I don't understand because why is it not a sub-amendment?
Because to seek clarification for a legal opinion, it has to be done to the main motion on the floor. Executive Officer, can you please go through the explanation again?
Sure, through you, Chair. So I think the process that we're looking to follow here is this. We vote on the amendment as it is without your additional amendment. That will mean we essentially say yes or no to the amendments that Trustee Scott has put on the floor. Once that, assuming that those are approved or whether or not they are approved, we then get back to the main motion, which is to approve the adoption of the policy. On that main motion to approve the adoption of the policy, you may then at that point seek to add an amendment to that motion to say we approve the adoption of the policy and you also are requiring staff to get a legal opinion. So it's doing what you're trying to do, I think, except it's doing it on the main motion instead of on the motion to amend to add these definitions. Am I clear, Chair, or should I add further clarification?
No, that was clear. Trustee Kaplan-Meier.
I think I would say it's clear, but you're asking us to vote on an amendment to a policy without our knowing whether or not we have to be agreeing to discriminate against people who don't have spouses or partners or children.
Through you, Chair, I understand the hesitation. I genuinely do. But in essence, yes, that's what we're saying, is that we're saying that we vote on these amendments, knowing that it could be that when we add this legal opinion to the main motion, when we get that legal opinion back, it may say, actually, that policy that you had with those definitions is not permissible, or that you could have added additional language that you didn't add. And we won't know that answer until we get that legal opinion back. But the legal opinion could come back to say, yeah, that policy that you crafted, you can go back and change that now if you want to.
Okay.
Trustee Kaplan-Meier.
All right. Well, it still doesn't sit right that we would discriminate against any people on our board or future people on the board. I guess the other question is whether or not, this is better than what currently exists, and perhaps it is. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Trustee Kaplan-Meier. I first time speaker, Trustee Presley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, I hope this is all right with everyone. I would like to make an amendment in hopes of streamlining the process.
I believe you mean a sub-amendment
A
because an
sub-amendment,
amendment
yes,
is on the
Chair,
floor.
my apologies. I would move to amend that we strike including activities necessary to provide financially for family and end it simply at or other necessary family-related activities.
Okay, so just to confirm, you are looking to strike including activities necessary to provide financially for family.
That's correct.
All right, I'm going to look to staff to ensure that this is within the regulation, and then I will be looking to the mover to see if this is a friendly sub-amendment.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Yes, this would be consistent with the regulation from my reading of it. Just as General Manager is typing out that sub-amendment, I would note that it has to include the comma, the word including, essentially the entire piece of the after the comma following family-related activities. Everything after that would be struck, is my understanding of the sub-amendment.
Yes, I believe that is the understanding. So I'm seeing a nodding head from Trustee Presley. So I'm now looking to the mover of the amendment. Trustee Scott, is this a friendly sub-amendment?
It's up to all of us to decide that.
I apologize. I'm looking around the room. Is this a friendly sub-amendment? Please raise your hand if this is not a friendly sub-amendment. Okay, Trustee Presley, you get introduction.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Through you, I believe that the current definition is reasonable and broad enough that in specific situations as deemed by the chair, that's, you know, if there was a family-related activity that did relate to being able to provide financially for the family, it would then be up to the chair to use their discretion to grant that exemption. I think that's covered. I believe it's quite simple.
All right, thank you, Trustee Presley. Trustee, I have a speaker's list, so I have Trustee Lara.
I think this is better with the clarity that future chairs can look at it and see that it does include financial responsibilities for the family. So I think it's better with the language not struck.
All right, thank you, Trustee Lara. I'm looking around the room to see if there's additional speakers to the sub-amendment on the floor to strike the words including activities necessary to provide financially for a family. Trustee Kaplan-Murth.
So can I just ask for clarification? If we get rid of the part of the sentence that says including activities necessary to provide financially for family, that would mean that you couldn't argue that having to live somewhere else for a job would count. Is that correct?
I'm going to look for the executive officers or the legal counsel to comment on that.
Through you, Chair, my understanding, as I think I said at the outset of this conversation, was that the language of provide financially for family was intended to capture work-related activity or income earning related activity. And I don't see that the rest of the definition necessarily speaks to that specifically, but I do agree with Trustee Presley's interpretation of other necessary family-related activities as being very broad and capturing a range of activities that we don't necessarily know what that would include tonight.
All right, thank you, Executive Officer. Trustee Kaplan-Murth.
So we're agreeing that we can take out the clause about providing financially, but that we're saying it's still broad and it would still include jobs. But we can't agree that that would be true for an individual. So if I didn't have a family and I needed to move to California to work, I wouldn't be covered by that. But if I had a spouse who needed to take a job in Silicon Valley and I said, sorry, but I'm going to have to do the rest of my tenure from California, then that would count? Is that what we're saying?
I will hand it back to the executive officers or our legal counsel to provide comment.
Through you, Chair, I wouldn't want to comment specifically on that hypothetical. I think that these decisions are intended to be made on a case-by-case, request-by-request basis, and it would be improper for me, I think, at this point to speculate on a hypothetical. The chair would have to consider that at the time that the request is made, but I will go back to what I said initially, which is that the language necessary family-related activities is quite broad, and it could include a whole host of different activities that it would be unreasonable to try to enumerate here tonight.
All right, Trustee Kaplan-Murth.
Okay, thank you. I hear you. I'm just pointing out that we're being inconsistent because we're broad when we want to be broad and we're being narrow when we want to be narrow. I'll leave it at that.
I am seeing no other speakers to the sub-amendment that is currently on the floor. So Trustee Presley, you get wrap up on the sub-amendment that is on the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll keep it brief. As I stated before, the definition as I've sub-amended is still quite broad and can be open to interpretation by the chair at their discretion. I think that covers it. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Trustee Presley. So we are now going to be voting for the sub-amendment on the floor to strike the words including activities necessary to provide financially for family. All those in favor of the sub-amendment, please raise your hand. And that carries. So that is now struck. We are now going back to the main amendment on the floor, which is the definition of family responsibilities. To confirm, Trustee Blackburn, I did have you on my speakers list. All right. Are there any other speakers to the amendment of the new definition of family responsibilities that is on the floor? I am seeing none. Trustee Scott, wrap up.
It's been an interesting debate, and it just illustrates many of the problems that are going to be attached to this particular regulation in a lot of boards around the province for the foreseeable future. The trouble with regulations is that while there is some latitude towards interpreting and understanding and putting together definitions, the wiggle room is still quite limited. And there are a number of things that I think are missing in the regulation that there was no way I could even begin to think of a way that fell within the amount of limited wiggle room that we have to us. But I do think it is important for the board to have the ability to provide some direction to the chair in terms of that concept of reasonableness and latitude. And this is having some definitions, I think, is a useful thing. So I hope my colleagues will support.
All right, thank you, Trustee Scott. We are now voting on the amendment that is currently on the floor for the new definition of family responsibilities. All those in favor? And that carries. All right, we are going back to the main motion on the floor, but I'm going to hand it back to the chair because she is no longer moving the amendment. So give us 1 minute to switch spots.
And so we have dealt with the amendment. Are there other speakers to the motion? Trustee Lyra.
Thanks. I have an amendment to the main motion.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I would like to add a new bullet. If the chair refuses to allow a trustee to attend virtually, that trustee may, in abstention, challenge the chair as the first item of business at the meeting they were otherwise denied attendance to.
And we need a seconder for that, I think. Oh, no, we don't, because we're in rules of committee. So we've got, can we have a bigger print on the screen, please?
Keep going, down, down, down. There we go. Trustee Scott, may I have introduction?
I'm just wanting to be clear. What do you mean in abstention? Do you mean in absentia?
I did write in absentia.
So take out the first T and put an A on the end. There we go. TIA. I'm just trying to understand the language of that because I'm not sure that it actually says if the trustee is in absentia, that means they are not present. So if they are not present, they can't challenge virtually or otherwise.
So this comes up because the trustee has been refused the link to the meeting by the chair. And the first thing they may choose to, as the first item of business, have that decision of the chair challenged by the meeting so that they have the opportunity to attend if the chair has otherwise denied them that opportunity.
I will ask if staff comment as to whether the language the language makes sense and describes something that it would in fact be possible, because I'm not sure that it does.
Chair, if I could just have maybe 30 seconds to consult with my staff colleagues, that would be helpful on this question. Is that okay if I have 30 seconds to consult with my colleagues here? Thank you.
Chair Scott, can I just ask a question, just in terms of process? What happened to my amendment? It's gone, or because it's still scroll up, it's still there, but did I have to bring it back again?
You would have to bring it back again.
Okay.
In this round where we're on the main motion. And I would also remind everybody that it is 10:15 and we will have the 10:30 vote coming up. And it is important to deal with this policy. Even if it's imperfect, we can bring it back and make further amendments.
Thank you for that, Chair. Typically, a challenge to the chair is something that would happen based on a decision made by the chair in the meeting, not a decision made by the chair outside the meeting. So that's one concern I have. The other concern is the absentia provision, which I'm not sure that I have a clear answer in my own head at this point, but it doesn't seem as though a person in absentia would be able to challenge anything, even if the challenge was possible for some reason. That seems to be an impossibility to both be absent and challenging something in a meeting that you're absent from.
Trustee Lara.
So my question, I guess, to the executive officer is, what language would you use to say that a trustee who has been denied access to the meeting by the chair has made a ruling and said, your reason is not good enough, either for whatever reason, they say the weather's not that bad, the child's not that sick, doesn't matter what their rationale is. The chair has said, you don't get the meeting link. And the trustee says, I disagree, I think my reason is good enough, I'd like the virtual meeting link. What language would you use to allow that trustee to appeal to the board as a whole, or the meeting as a whole?
The only thing, through you, Chair, the only thing I can suggest is that if you go to the regulation, the government expressly grants this authority to the chair or vice chair where applicable. And when you contrast that with rules of parliamentary procedure that speak to challenging the decision of a chair, they talk about challenging something that's happened on the floor, the requirement to do so immediately, things like that. So on a quick view of it, it seems that these are these two things don't align. And so you'd have to revert to the regulation, which grants this authority expressly to the chair.
So what I am hearing is that there is no way that you can envision to allow someone who is denied access to a meeting on any kind of appeal to the board itself. That is what I'm hearing.
Through you, Chair, that's from a plain reading of the regulation, that's correct.
Okay, then I'm going to withdraw this amendment.
Thank you, Trustee Lara. Now, Trustee Kaplan-Wirth, you did still wish to bring an amendment?
I think I'm going to just forget about it. Let's move on. We're good.
And on the main motion, I have no other speakers, so I will go back to the mover for wrap-up, and that was Trustee Lara.
I'm going to say my wrap-up should be, we should leave rules of committee, and we should pass this.
In that case, what we should do is to have a motion to end rules of committee. Thank you, Trustee Lara. All those in favor of ending rules of committee? And opposed? That motion is carried. So Nell, would you like to have wrap up or?
Nope.
No? In that case, if I could ask Ms. Baker to open the vote in eScribe. And we will vote on the motion as amended. Which was, as if I go back here, which was to approve the policy and with the amendment to add the definitions. And the motion is carried unanimously. And that concludes that item on the agenda. We now have matters for information. There are no new matters for information. Oh, sorry, before that, matters for discussion, report from OPSPA. Trustee Kaplan-Murth. Oh, sorry. No, I thought I'd seen your hand, Trustee Kaplan-Murth.
Just for new business, not for OPSPA.
So, okay. So we'll go to the OPSPA report from Trustee Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair. Just to note that Trustee Scott and myself will be attending the OPSPA Board of Directors meeting in Toronto this Friday and Saturday, and we'll report after.
Any questions for Trustee Jenkins? Seeing none, that brings us to matters for information. And I don't believe we have any new matters for information, Director. That takes us then to, oh, you have a matter for information, takes us to new business, and I will recognize Trustee Kaplan-Murth and then Trustee Lyra.
Thank you. I just wanted to flag that it's been reported that several school groups in Toronto went on a field trip to Grassy Narrows River Run, and that was an event that was promoted as being in support of the Grassy Narrows First Nation and their efforts to address mercury contamination affecting their community. However, like some other gatherings in the last year, that event was co-opted as a Middle East protest, and the Toronto District School Board, I understand, is investigating. Given that this is an emerging pattern for districts, I'm asking the OCDSB what action we are undertaking to ensure that a similar situation does not occur in our district, either in field trips or in other district activities. I'm looking specifically to our board and our district to comment on policy in terms of participation in protests for the district as a whole, and guidance for educators if they are at an event that becomes a protest of any kind.
Director, do we have any current guidance in our policies?
Certainly, I'll turn it over through you, Madam Chair, to Associate Director Reynolds for a comment around system-wide direction for protests, that kind of thing. Just a comment in advance as I turn it over to the Associate Director around our expectation as staff that there would be clarity for parents, guardians, caregivers in any activity or event, initiative or project that students would be involved in, that the clarity of the activity would be clearly delineated in advance. And that would be any event, any school-related events or district-related events. But I'll turn over to the Associate Director around the specific second part of the request.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. So there's a few pieces that are in place that would help safeguard against this. Over the last several years, annually, we have issued direction to staff that at no time are we to facilitate, support, encourage participation in any kind of protest. Individuals choose to do so on their own time outside of this, professional and learning environment. That's one thing, but certainly we don't permit that. We have also issued direction that if students do choose to walk out or engage in something, we'll try to discourage But we'll, if we're not successful, we won't physically stop. We'll focus on keeping them safe and trying to mitigate against any harm that's been caused. And some of that messaging is going to be repeated in a memo that's forthcoming shortly from our equity division. Furthermore, through our field trip procedure, which is just being renewed and will be pushed out later this week to the system, actually, the field trip procedure has a new lens, or an increased lens, I should say, on equity of access, equity of learning, and human rights, meaning that, field trip organizers have a duty to vet and investigate and be confident in what is the learning material, what are the activities that are going to take place, and not to support or encourage a trip that would in any way make student participants, any reasonable way we might foresee make student participants feel uncomfortable, unsafe, or that they should not or could not really participate in that for reasons of their own identity. Some of that, it was envisioned more around and pardon the expression, but the existing, pioneer village kind of things where we didn't want students being exposed to some of the messages that go along with those type of venues, but it would take into account similar situations. Now, in the event that something were to spontaneously happen that had not been encountered or encouraged, certainly that is a difficult situation for any staff to manage in the moment. And again, we're hoping that some of the toolkit that our anti-hate, anti-bias toolkit that the equity department's put together and staff are becoming aware of, as well as the direction that is forthcoming and will be in the hands of staff shortly, would help them manage and address those situations. But that would be certainly a challenging one should it occur, but hopefully through proper planning, it's not likely.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Trustee Lyra.
Thanks. I'm going to set aside the director and the associate director's response for a moment. I have a question about the applications for Zone 2. The deadline was the 20th, and I'm wondering what the process is, where is the continuation of that process? And where are we in terms of the creating of the questions that we had all agreed to? What's going on? What's the plan?
Through you, Madam Chair, I'll turn it over to our executive officer.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. As Trustee Lyra indicated, the application process closed on Friday, September 20th, and we received applications from 8 individuals, all of whom we have confirmed as being qualified to put their names forward. One of the items we plan to discuss as part of the upcoming agenda planning is the next step, which is to bring to trustees the sample questions for consideration, as well as some other details with respect to the process that will be followed on the 15th.
And I have Trustee Dixon.
Through you, Chair, this question's for the director. I would like to inquire about the current status of the hiring process for the Palestinian Arabic speaking Muslim coach, and the position. Could you give us an update?
Certainly, through you, Madam Chair, what I'll do for the Board of Trustees and Trustee Dixon in particular is follow up with Superintendent Farish, who oversees the equity department, on the status of those positions, staffing, especially at a time when there's always transition and movement. I'll bring a follow-up to the Board of Trustees on the status of that. I don't have the specifics, and I don't want to provide detail that isn't accurate, so I'll follow up with Superintendent Farish and issue a memo or a follow-up with the Board of Trustees.
And we have, with 2 minutes to go, Trustee Bell.
Thank you very much. I'd like to seek further clarification on where in what policy we discourage protest. That was noted by our associate director right now. That's not my understanding. And so if we could get some further clarification at some point, hopefully soon, about supporting people's democratic right to protest, that would be great. Thanks.
And if the director can provide a memo?
Certainly noted through you, Madam Chair. We'll provide that for the Board of Trustees. Thanks to Trustee Bell.
And I'm not seeing any other hands raised for new business. And we are almost at the 10:30 vote, but not quite. So Since we have finished our agenda for this evening, I will declare the meeting adjourned and thank everyone for their good discussions.